welcome to the World Lens podcast, where we look at what's happening around the world each week through a global business lens. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, digital specialist at the World Trade Center Institute, and I'm joined by my good friend Bruce McIndoe, president of McIndoe Risk Advisory and WTCI board member. Hi, Bruce.
Hey, Michelle.
So this week we're going to discuss the trajectory of Japan's market and economy. A little bit foreign to me, but I'm pretty sure you can help me out there. So, Bruce, what's going on in Japan? The Nikkei stock market just broke 40,000, surpassing its previous record in 1989.
Well,
What's up?
hopefully by the time you're listening to this, I'll be in Japan.
Firsthand experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had an office in previous company in Japan and have been following it. My son is there working, and so a lot of interest in Japan over the last 10 or 15 years.
Oh, nice.
So what's going on with the market? Yeah, it's always exciting when markets, break their historical anything, right? So whether it's
Mm-hmm.
low or high. But for the high, and so what's driving it? At a macro level, it's the cheap yen
Mm-hmm.
and some really solid government governance reforms that they did around the market that kind of shifted this pro company stance, which kind of pushed the stockholders to the side and gave them kind of more visibility as far as like they have to do some splaining when the stock price book to price ratio is below one, meaning that on the market its share price is less than the book value says that it is of what the assets they hold, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's why people are jumping in, because they see an upside.
So, what specific industries are driving it?
Yeah, I mean, for Japan, again, I would say, the semiconductor stocks because of all the craziness in AI world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely been a big one. But I think it's, just mainly that segment, because I did look at some data recently, and I'm going to say that I'm going to put a number out there. I think like 2/3, maybe a little less, but anyway, of companies listed on the Tokyo Exchange in the in that prime section, kind of the top ones, declined
Hmm.
at that close. So it's much like we have here with those industries that
Yeah.
now that have AI boosting them. They're going up above the crowd, and we have the same thing happening in Japan. The small group of companies driving this major stock gain.
So I read that there's been some corporate governance reforms that help kind of supercharge these stocks. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about before
Mm-hmm.
with like why are people jumping in, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a major restructuring of the rules, and like I said, it's that like key one is that opening transparency, right? And this whole kind of price to book ratio, like what is the stock price and what's the like asset value of the company, the book value divided by the number of shares, and how does that look? And if it's more than one, then the market is a premium. If it's less than one, why?
Right.
And in Japan, the company executives just didn't need to explain why. Why aren't you using capital in a more aggressive way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so that really, and the fact that if they didn't answer, they could be delisted. I don't know what the time period is, but fairly short period of time. They've got to like do this or be delisted. So it had teeth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to press companies to be more transparent and now actually use capital more efficiently. So
Yeah.
again, pumping up people's expectation that the market's going to overperform from its historical governance structure.
So it's if it's been so, effective in Japan, why don't we adopt something like that similar here in the United States?
Because we have a lot of other rules. But I would say um, we have greater, investor activism and transparency in our U.S. markets. Why they're the biggest and best in the world.
Mhm.
Um, so when I looked at the data, it was like half of the companies listed in the Tokyo Stock Exchange, right, trade at a price to book ratio of less than one.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, that's why people are annoyed, right?
Yeah.
In the S&P 500, 3%.
Hmm.
So, so it's like it's not an issue here, right? So, but it's a big issue, obviously, in Japan, and why there's, changing that government, putting some
Mhm.
teeth in governance rules, putting teeth into it. Uh, the weak yen that, they're betting on increasing. All of these things kind of add up to a market crescendo, right? So,
Yeah, you mentioned the yen being super weak right now.
mhm.
Does that mean there's more investment around the world, like from around?
Well, yeah, I mean the weak yen, has been, again, this concept of tailwind, right? Is a tailwind for stocks because, um, it boosts them, right? It
Mhm.
boosts lots of things as far as exports and those kinds of things. So it's, kind of like it's a built-in growth factor for a market, and and then that attracts foreign investment. So that's again where that foreign investment pours into the market. This last round leading into the big boom that we just talked about, when Warren Buffett in his, annual letter to shareholders
Mhm.
is pumping up Japan, and how, he expects it to be a great investment, and has these, his investments in these top trading houses. And so, there's a lot of expectation out there that the market is, even where it is now, is going to continue to be a great market to be in the near term.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the beginning that it's the highest Japan stock market has risen since 1989.
Hmm.
It's a pretty auspicious period to compare to. It was right before a major crash and economic stagnation that kicked off what some call lost decades. Is this a
Hmm.
is this a comparable system?
Mm, I guess it's like anything, you got to look at history, right? So, um, Japan, Japan was the number two economy at one point, right? So
Hmm.
they were knocking it out of the park, 30 years ago, and 20 years ago.
Right.
As far as technology that they were producing and the quality and cars and all these things. So they
Hmm.
were just, literally just knocking it out of the park. In the you know late in the late 1990s, it all kind of fizzled, right?
Hmm.
And that's the lost decades, right? So kind of 2000 to 2023, 2024, right?
Right.
And so this was, entering a period of stagnation,
Hmm.
and all the developed countries are sitting back because Japan has always been the bow wave
Hmm.
of what we know we're going to face eventually, and that is the decreasing populations,
Hmm.
aging populations. How do you grow an economy
When
and
you
and
have,
and have that environment? It's
yeah.
just it doesn't it just and so they're actually navigating it now, right? And this comes back
Hmm.
to labor participation. It also comes, productivity of that labor, right? And so can they get to some sustainable economy that doesn't constantly drive on GDP growth, right?
Hmm.
Because how are you going to do that? I mean, China is facing the same thing right now with Xi. It's like they're not having babies, their population is going to
Right.
decline precipitously. And how do they do that, right? And Belt and
Hmm.
Road was a big attempt, or an attempt that's ongoing, to tap other economies that have younger workforces to then have more of an integrated economy rather than mainland economy, right? So those are the things. So anyway, so productivity, and why Japan, I believe, is so attractive is they're like the leaders in robotics and AI, and it's like the figuring out how to get more done with older workforce and a smaller workforce. If I can have robots do stuff and AI do stuff,
Right.
and tools and processes to increase productivity, it's awesome. And so, like, some massive number, like, of all the industrial robots around the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, 80% or 90% or whatever were designed and or built by the Japanese.
Mm.
So they are way ahead on that,
Right.
which means they're on this curve to be a major player as the world over the next 5 to 10 years adopts millions and millions of robots and AI powered solutions to drive economies. And so I think that's the excitement for them. They're
So,
back in the game.
right. So last month they kind of entered into a bit of an official recession, and it
Yep.
lost its spot
Right on top of the
as,
boom in the market.
yeah, they're no longer the world's third largest economy.
Mhm.
How does that affect the conversation about their growth and success?
um, so I guess, just like I'm saying, these headwinds, right? The on them, everyone's watching that, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like managing a recession is a normal kind of economic thing that a nation state is faced, in cycles, right? So
Right.
that's like kind of normal. And so the economy in Japan falling from number two to number three, or from number three to number four, is the marching reality of what we've been talking about, right? The
Right.
demographics and those kinds of things. Um, Goldman, last year in a financial conference, basically projected that, okay, it's going to drop out of the top five economies in by 2050,
Hmm.
and it's going to drop out of the top 10 by 2075. So
Hmm.
again, just looking at those
Trajectory.
trajectories of demographics and demand, it's just going to be a constant falling, while economies like India and others just zoom to start rivaling the U.S. Right? So yeah.
What lessons can the U.S. take from this stock boom? Is it really time to pivot to AI?
Um, so I guess the stock boom is a market, right? That's market sentiment. I guess the lessons for the U.S. companies, the pivot to robotics and AI
Hmm.
and derivative technologies is already left the barn.
Yeah.
Okay. So a survey that was just done like last month said that most US companies, 99% of the Fortune 500, like when this survey was done several weeks ago,
Hmm.
have or are actively working to deploy AI in their products and services.
Wow.
So that's like, there's no pivot there. This is
This is
like
already there.
cradle, right? It's like we're moving, right? But that's not just in the U.S. So when I was looking at that, and I said, well, what does the global picture look like,
Right.
right? So from data that was done at the end of last year, they came up with 35% of global companies report that they're using AI in their business now.
Mm.
35%,
That's
right?
pretty good
Yeah.
for how
And 40,
infant.
yeah, yeah, and 42% are saying that they're actively exploring integrating AI within their company and operations, right?
Hmm.
And over 50% expect to deploy that this year.
Wow.
So 77% of global companies are either using or exploring AI as of the end of last year.
That's insane. I
It
mean,
is
it's
totally insane.
expected, but I didn't think it would be as many.
Yeah, the numbers were pretty jaw dropping.
Yeah, for sure.
Back to
So,
the talking about labor that we talked about before. It's
right.
like, yeah, it's going to be very disruptive. It's going to be amazing, but it's going to be challenging.
Hopefully, they won't have AI doing this podcast for us.
Yeah.
All right. So, you know what's coming. It's time for the crystal ball, Bruce.
Hmm.
Give me a look at Japan in the future. And then also all of the companies that are driving this rapid growth.
Yeah. So, again, right now, this is all fervor at the start of the race, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
when I look at kind of the consensus, they're saying like growth's going to remain sluggish, for this year. We got high inflation, weak domestic demand, the household saving rates turned negative, right? So, that's kind of the near term, and the um, kind of if you look at it, they're saying, look, and this again, this is this whole where everybody's sitting on the sidelines saying, "Go Japan, go Japan." So
Right.
they're projecting like maybe a 1 to 1.5% kind of average growth rate over the next 10 years,
Hmm.
right? Uh, for Japan. So essentially, steady state, right?
Hmm.
And can that be successful, right? Can they have a viable economy and labor opportunity and those kinds of things in a essentially a no grow GDP, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm pulling for Japan to figure out how to kind of collectively manage a declining and aging population,
Mm-hmm.
supercharging it with innovative technology, right? And when you talk about collectively, the Japanese culture is like a well-oiled machine as far as
Mm-hmm.
having the citizens of that country coming together, working together. So I really feel like they have the tools and the technology at their disposal to make this steady state work.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in every developed country around the world should be on the sidelines cheerleading and collectively helping them to succeed, because where they are, we will be,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
You know.
I mean, wow. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a Taste of Business Japan coming up next
Yeah.
month in April. And this is definitely probably something they're going to be discussing
Oh,
from the
absolutely.
US Embassy of Japan.
Mhm.
But I'm
Or if they're
definitely
not
looking
discussing
forward.
it, they'll be asked to discuss it because
For
I'll be there.
sure. For sure. You'll make sure it's there. Well, Bruce, thank you so much. Remind everybody where they can find you.
Sure, McIndoeRiskAdvisory.com or on LinkedIn or at the WTCI site.
Awesome. And of course, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure you follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. Thank you so much. See you next week.